requested Glyn give his demonstration or presentation, but yeah, it's certainly been a challenge. As you know, from our weeks over this year, we've looked at many artists, and sometimes looking at other artists is a lot easier than looking at yourself. But I've given it my best shot here, and I thought I'd take us back quite a while early on. Obviously, not back to three, um, but definitely to early teenage years. But I thought in with the presentation, I just put a few little quotes that I've kind of thought up that maybe sum up some of the work. Um, it's an unusual adventure, an unusual artistic adventure. I think I would say that I've been on, because it's not just all about paintings, as you will see. But as I said, creativity is an adventure. Explore without knowing where you are going. Appreciate the moments of understanding along the way, and hopefully there'll be a few. So I thought I'd take you back to something that I did as a teenager. So we're going back 40 years here now. I think I was about 14 when I did this. It's a watercolor and gouache, which is something, a medium I still like to use today. I remember at the time being interested in the light in the piece, and particularly the reflections at the base of the silver jar. That's a little portrait of me in there, but it was about space, and as I said, I was quite young, so just interested in capturing the drawing, the form, the format, all those kinds of elements in it. Um, but so there was something simple about it, as there's an element of beauty. But at the time, experimenting with how paint works, if you like, and how to capture certain kind of artistic effects on the surface. And then this is another early picture, obviously of Cardiff Market, going back a long time. But this was part of one of the fundamental threads, which I suppose has run through my work, because this was what I would call the start of a collective community piece. I spent many weeks at the market making this, meeting a lot of the stall holders, and I did hundreds of drawings of them and making lots of conversations. And this is just one picture from that kind of series. But a lot of these people I'd kind of met or seen and just placed them within the picture. But I thought it was a fascinating place as well, because right in the centre of Cardiff, there was this kind of other world going on. And yes, it's a haven, but there's depths to this building. As some of you might know, one time it was a police station and even a jail. And you can see this was the main centre tower, and the cells were all around the outside. So it had quite a history to it. And the people I met at that time, of course, they were keen to tell me all about their history and their heritage. And a lot of the stall holders had, for generations, been in the market. And even my own family, we go back, some of the family were living just round the corner here in the 1870s. My mum's great-great-grandfather was actually, he was the landlord and the minister of the local church, teetotal landlord, but it was the Owen Glyndŵr, which is just outside that. So there was a lot of kind of family heritage there. So I suppose partly I was connected to that. So, be drawn by what interests you. And sometimes when you're so young, I was a teenager there, I wasn't 100% sure why I was drawn to it. But when you get in more in depth into the subject, you start to find its other riches. And then the community collective piece. This is a large mural that I worked on with a number of youngsters, actually, 30 years ago, can't believe it, for Barry Youth Centre. And you can see the letters there, B, Y, and C. And we kind of pulled it all together and discussed what the youngsters wanted in the picture. It took a number of months, but you can see it took along the idea of a journey. It was their minibus, and it was running through time there. Also with some of the things which are interesting to them, some of the things they did. There's a pool table, this is mountaineering and things like that, kayaking. But there was also an input of like a social discourse there. You can see the European flag being attached to it. Obviously, there was great push to get in Europe and be part of Europe at that time. Things had changed. And there's also, other social comments were running through it. When I undertook it, the chap that ran the centre said, well, give it a go, Glyn, but he said, I can't imagine it lasting at all because all they want to do is graffiti over things and destroy it. But it was there for many years. I think it must have been there 15 or 20 years until they closed the youth centre, unfortunately. And then bits and pieces of it were dispersed around wherever they went to. I think some of them in some people's attics now. But it was an interesting process. But in my art, for the art, it was about the community and collective working together. As I said here, the experience of creativity is a relationship between you and the other, and share it with kindness, because that does come through in the artwork that you will produce. And then I undertook a whole series of artworks. It's called The Empty Chair, that took place in a place called the Public House. A public house was there was a double meaning to that, of course. Public house is a place, the local pub, people go for a drink and to gather, but the nature of something being public is that it's open to all. So I've made hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of drawings and sketches in these places, often to the bewilderment of the clientele. There was lots of experiences and stories which I could tell you about that happened over those years. But it became a little bit like a human laboratory, if you like. People were there for all kinds of reasons, socializing, yes, but also maybe with the alcohol and things like that, sometimes to mask their suffering or to put a play on together, in terms of how they shared their relationship with each other. So it became kind of fascinating. So you can see like there's a group of people just sat there chatting there, or a couple there. There's also a chap that's kind of reflecting, contemplative, that's maybe looking out at the scene, and there's mirrors there, as is in this figure here. Get this theme which comes out about waiting as well, which that seems to appear often. And you do see that in public houses a lot. People just sit there, and they sit there quietly. Some people are there on their own, and some people, don't communicate that much. They almost sink into their drink, whereas we normally focus on the groups and the activity and things which are going on. But there's many layers to that place and that experience. And then this is, the whole theme of this is this kind of empty chair with these kind of angel wings in the background. So it's about what you could call apprehended space. It's the idea is there's something about to happen. And that's been another theme as well, is trying to get between moments and trying to indicate there's something just beyond what is happening. It's not quite there. There's something that is kind of mysterious, which is about to approach, if you like. You can see the technique changed here. This is an acrylic picture, but it's built up from washes of thin acrylic glazes, and then overlaid is some thicker, almost like in a pointillist kind of technique. It's quite a deep and rich picture, this, in terms of its color and intensity, more than on the graphic that you see there. And then this is another one of that kind of series. The one we just saw was in the old Wenvo Arms, and this one was based, the stage for this was the Cwmkiddy pub in Barry. But you can see that there's this other narrative going on. There's interactions between the different figures, but there was key themes which keep repeating themselves. Things like the chessboard in the front here, and this singular bottle on this horse. These all became kind of motifs that ran through the whole series of works. There's some action going on, but there's also piece is called The Conversation, but you can see it's obviously about two people who are not really connecting. They're not having a conversation with each other. So there's always this dichotomy, these other themes running through the piece. And I also sat and think something that looked like church pews. So there's also this kind of theme about contemplation or reflection, which kind of appear over and over in the work. So there's multiple layers of it. I'm moving through fairly quickly, obviously, because there's quite a few to look at. But this one was painted on a board, a hard board. It's quite a big piece, maybe 2 or 3 foot across. And this is built up with watercolor underneath, and then pastel over the top, just to give the strength and the extra kind of contrast over the of the work. So as he said in this, you can paint your suffering by all means, but don't expect others to share in it. And I think, lots of artists, particularly of a certain kind of ilk or technique, I'm thinking of like the expressionist artists and abstract expressionists. They do fundamentally go deep inside to try and share some kind of universal truth. It's usually some perception of kind of suffering, but then how you transform that. This one was of a lady that I met in a pub in High Street in Bury. She was probably in her mid-70s at the time. There was a few of them sat together. And she just sat there silently, just drinking her, vodka and tonic or whatever it was. And it kind of, the way she was sat and looking almost like singly out, although she was amongst people, she looked, on her own. It reminded me of the old picture, the Impressionist picture by Degas, the absinthe drinker, in a look. So that kind of stayed with me in terms of the image. But then the way this picture's kind of built up, the multi-layered quality to it, it's on hardboard, which is then being treated with Artex to give it texture. And then while the texture is wet, the end of the brush has been dragged through it to create these different marks. And this is just to kind of indicate a certain kind of turbulence maybe in the thought process of the figure that you're trying to portray. And then layers of acrylic ink are poured over the surface, different colors, a few different colors, and then a piece of hard plastic laid over that and then let to dry. But before that happens, actually, let me think about it. After the texture was put on and was dry, there's a black and white underpainting under there that I painted in acrylic. So it's quite a well-formed three-dimensional underpainting that then gets softened when you overlay the wet acrylic over the top with the plastic. Once that's dry, peel that off, and then you can just pick up with acrylic and finish out the lights and darks. So this was another part of the other theme which kept appearing through the work. It was about trying to not make someone or whatever I was trying to show look too solid, almost like as if they were ghostly or they had many layers to them. So everything is in a constant state of change. And that became part of the themes which I was working through there for a few years. These are two heads, two figures from a large painting, Lost Carriage. The whole picture is 6 foot by 3 foot, built up in the same kind of way, layers of acrylic paint underneath to form black and white acrylic, which is given a three-dimensional structure to the head and the other heads. I think there was about 20 or so portraits in the Lost Carriage, all collectively put together. And then layers of thinner acrylic go over the top after, ink has been kind of allowed to float over the surface. And then this is finished in oil paints then. So you can see how the oil paints adds extra texture and thickness to it. And the paint has been dragged over the surface or dabbed in certain places just to build up levels of interest. So when, it's quite a textured painting, when you see it under different lights, these heads, you read the head initially as one figure, but in different lights, all these kind of little mini figures and mini shapes start to appear. And this picture actually took 2 years to paint. The whole I'm laughing because it went through lots of processes, and I think after I'd painted it for about 18 months or so, I completely whitewashed it because it just wasn't working. So then I had to almost like start again. And then it took a couple more months after that to kind of finish. So sometimes that's the kind of process that you go through. And as I said, some of these pictures took months and some took years at this stage. Used to going back 20, 25 years when I did this. Now they've become a lot quicker, but at the time I labored over them far too long often. um, and as part of that, running through that, there's always been this other theme of working with musicians. Again, these are collaborative pieces. These were done live with these musicians in front of me often. Some might have been finished in the studio with a bit of colour, as this one was. It's Harrison Smith from Concert in Cardiff. But I think I was always drawn to the jazz kind of way of music. I was introduced to music very early on. My dad was a good musician, and I started to play the piano when I was about 6. So I, studied it and a lot of classical music, etc., etc. But drawn to jazz, and I think it was probably the main theme was because jazz is about freedom. It's a unique musical form. It was obviously, out of slavery and in America, and finding a whole new language and challenging a certain kind of system and developing something. But also the way jazz is kind of performed, there's space in it for individual expression and freedom, but within the collective of the group that the musicians are playing with. And when I was there making these images with them, I almost became another member of the band. Often they would look over or nod or whatever, and the rhythms and everything else that they were doing or sharing was coming through in the drawings and the artworks, as you can see here. The one on the left is a portrait of a chap I did in Havana. He had a fantastic voice, really deep and rich, but you can see he's very contemplative. And we just sat together on the top of this hotel in the center of Havana, and had a conversation, and then made that. But the others were made, as I said, live while these musicians were playing. I knew one or two. I'd actually played with this bass player in a band years ago, but others I didn't. But as I said, it was a collaborative process that we were working together. And it was because of the music was kind of vibrating and sounds were happening that dictated the kind of marks that I was using with the pieces. These are relatively small, like 5A6, but as I said, their presence of the musicians was coming through in the artwork, and it was keeping that vibrancy there and alive that enabled it to kind of follow through. I think in the end I did about 40, maybe 50 of these. So there's just a small selection. So it was a few festivals. And then the creative process. Be non-judgmental with your creative process. That's important because you want to get discouraged. Respond with openness and kindness to what you see emerging before you. And the key there is openness and kindness to yourself, with yourself, and thinking big when you see something appear in front of you on your surface. And of course, this is also how you interact with art. Art gives us a chance to think in a big way. And, things emerging. This is a good example. St. David's Cathedral, as you can see here. The spiritual aspect and landmark buildings is another theme which has run through my work for many, many years. I was fortunate enough to go to St. Fagans Church in Wales School before it closed many years ago. And that meant, we spent a lot of time in the local church every day. And there was something rich that came from that. Not the kind of straightforward richness of just, for example, the Christian tradition, because that never really took off for me. There was lots of other things that I was interested in as well as, um, but it was the community element which were there. And that's probably where I made my first artwork when I was about 5 or 6. And that was a community piece. And that was a piece that was made out of Lego, of all things, where I've got the other students together. And we made this large Lego boat of a Cutty Sark for the parents' evening. But I think it was something about working together collaboratively there that enabled that to take a hold. But this kind of is what I call an icon picture. So it's like reflective element where something is placed down with a strong intent at the beginning, and then layers are laid over it, and something emerges out of it. This piece again was painted on board, and then acrylic black and white painting was painted underneath it, and some of the elements can kind of just be seen through. And then floated elements of acrylic ink again, clear plastic laid over that, peeled off, and it leaves elements of spaces within it because it's a textured surface. And then you can just slowly bring out the form after with layers of paint. And you get this kind of ghostly emergence happening. Fascinating technique. And it's about finding something. It's about being creatively searching and experimenting all the time, as is this one, as well as these ancient landmarks that we saw there with the cathedrals. I've done many cathedrals and churches over the years, but also prehistoric standing stones, and ancient sites. It's just going as far back as you can in history and prehistory, just trying to investigate, what layers stand behind motivation, I suppose, of why things were placed in the place they were. Why did people collectively gather at certain environments, and then finding out about those. So this is a place in northern France, Gavrini. Like we looked at the Celtic art, and we looked at the place in Ireland, Newgrange, which was a burial tumulus. Well, this is in Gavrini. It's something similar, not quite as large, but as you saw with the Newgrange piece, they had lots of stone carvings along the outside. Well, in Gavrini, they've got them inside, and they're like this. They're like these archways, these little curved lines, and the massive stone slabs, but they almost look like fingerprints. But this is a view laying on the floor of the cave, if you like, or the tumulus, looking up and out. And it kind of seemed to glow. There's a kind of sacredness to it. And you're thinking, well, people were there 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and they've imbued it with something. So it's trying to create a emotive feeling that you get from the experience of actually being there. And in terms of technique and materials used, this picture is created on glass. It's on a mirrored glass, which then acrylic ink is dripped over the surface of it. Different kinds of inks. Liz is an expert with this now, isn't she? Some are opaque, some are transparent, and some are semi-transparent. And depending on how opaque or how thick they are, and sometimes I'd mix in some acrylic paint with it just to make it a little bit thicker, because that enables you to use a knife or the end of your brush to actually etch into the surface while it's still wet of the acrylic ink as well. And then, of course, the idea of this piece is about light, but it's not just external light that we experience, it's this internal light, this internal journey. So because it's on mirrored glass, the stronger you shine a light onto it, the more it glows. And there's always some part of it which is just pure mirror. So then the viewer becomes an interactive part of the piece. They pass through it and see little glimmers of their own reflection in the artwork. I did a whole series of these pieces around about this time. This is probably about 20 or so years ago. still, just to explore that idea of inner light, sense of presence in special places that have been marked as special, and something which has had that deep resonance or richness. As is this one, in a way. This was inspired by these very large chalk prehistoric markings that you see in parts of England. There's one in Uffington in Oxfordshire, where you've got this great big horse that is, I think it's about at least 150 foot long, has been carved into the side of a chalk hill. And when they excavated it, they found out in places it was at least a meter or two deep. So, there's this idea that our ancient ancestors were making this huge white chalk symbol that they could only be seen properly from above, from those up that could either fly or, or observe from the heavens. Obviously, I don't think they had airplanes or helicopters 3,000 years ago. Who knows? But I don't think so. So there was a kind of a metaphor for them of something very large and expansive, but also an idea that we carry with us because, our mind has the capacity to understand the cosmos in its largest extent, the vastness of it, as well as something very small like a grain of sand. That's making a shortened statement from William Blake. It's about the capacity and the immensity that art has to keep us thinking big and bright. Now this one, in terms of the way it's being created, because we're learning about different techniques here as well. This is on thick watercolor paper that has had thin layers of acrylic ink mixed with acrylic paint poured over the surface, quite a lot of it, different kinds of thicknesses, and then with a thin plastic laid over that surface and kind of merged together, so there's no white of the paper showing in this case. And then that's peeled off, and then I use oil paint over the top of this in a traditional way, with glazes. So I'd use oil paint to glaze over the thin acrylics to create these elements of depth. And when you look at this picture, you see this kind of strange Homer Simpson kind of cosmic man striding across the cosmos. But when you look into it, again, it's about transience and layering. You start to see other faces emerge. You can see this face kind of come out. And if you're in front of it, you'll see lots of other faces and forms and cosmic ideas, stars and suns and planets. I think at the time I was interested in image from the Hubble Space Telescope, and some of those things seem to feed their way in through to the work as well. Okay, these themes of ancient standing stones and Celtic traditions and prehistoric traditions obviously have come out in this piece. This was a portrait, believe it or not, of a standing stone that I found in Avesbury, and they're amazing. Some of you would have been there, no doubt, but if you haven't, try and go, because some of these stones are absolutely vast, and it must have taken incredible effort to kind of place them there. So they have an immense presence. And this started off as a kind of highly finished figurative image of the stone that's then kind of really got transformed. It was part of another picture that in the end got ripped off and stuck onto this one. This picture probably took 6 or 9 months over the time. It's had lots of layers and elements to it. It's put together in about at least 5 to 8 parts. You can just about make out some thin lines through the corners there. This is one piece of thick paper. There's another in the background. And they're all joined together, placed on a board. And then this center stone, which got completely transformed, is then stuck over the top of that. And you can see like little jewels. These are layers of acrylic paint, which is just built up with strong kind of textures. And all these elements, the lighter parts, are all gold leaf. And you can recognize some of the symbols that we looked at from our Celtic tradition and heritage there. And all these other symbols as well, they talk of the Celtic language. But it's mixed together with something which is strong designs, and then something spontaneous. You know, towards the end, I suppose you have to be quite brave after all those months, just to drip levels of layers of acrylic paint over the surface as well, just to give this connection between something ancient and something immediate, all coming together, all coalescing in the artwork. But the theme is the ancient prehistoric stones, and you know, the magnitude and the resonance that they give us when we're amongst them. And then this is a picture that was part of a series of images of sky that I made after visiting ancient prehistoric sites. So it was a case of going to places like Stonehenge, Avesbury in Wales, places like Pentre Even, or locally we got places like Tinken's Wood. This is Pentre Even in West Wales. And then standing in that place and looking directly up, sometimes laying on the floor, looking directly up, and just trying to imagine what our prehistoric ancestors would have seen. They would have seen a similar sky, and they would have seen, you know, when you look at the sky, it's universal, it's eternal, and they would have had a sense of why they put those immense standing stones in the landscape that they did. So it's trying to kind of tune in to something large, vast, as well as being connected with something solid. And this is actually an abstract image of the sky seen through a break in the clouds. It can be also looks like red. It could be like looking into a sea or something vast like that, something just kind of quite turbulent. But you know, when you really look at it, and I think Liz would have looked at this because I think it might be hanging on a wall somewhere. It's done quite a few years ago. There's all these Celtic cycles and symbols beneath the surface of it, but it was part of a whole series of you know, marking ancient sites via its presence, looking up at the sky. This is an acrylic painting built up with lots of layers over it as well. And then the artwork evolved from this ancient searching and looking and being part of something rich and deep to working in an interesting, different way. You know, collaboration is a route to freedom. Life is relational. And this was interesting. I dug this whole picture out because I thought it was particularly relevant what we're doing at the moment. It was, I think what we've done as a group, as a collective of the art group, is absolutely fantastic. It's lovely to see you kind of developing these themes and sharing it. As I said, this was done in 2009. And I remember at the time there was a little bit of resistance, but it was about and given the community an opportunity to relate with artworks. So as I just mentioned, these are the sky, some of the sky images that were made at different parts of the country. So it was almost like taking these prehistoric sites and that perspective and bringing them to the local community, but also as a way of drawing the community towards nature and focus on nature. So hence they were placed on trees, and this became another theme. We saw in the Celtic tradition, the Celts were always particularly fascinated by trees, nature, and water. So those two fundamental elements were at the heart of some of these early collaborative works. But this was the first one that I did, and then I did the same thing. I'm laughing. This was there. I think I put it up Friday evening, and it stayed there till Monday morning. No problems. Few strange looks, but it was there. I suppose I should also mention, you can see they're also put on like mirrored glass there, transparent. This was hard plastic, but it was reflective. Reason for that was when the viewer came up to it, they actually saw their reflection in it, and they become part of the artwork as well. This an interactive element, interactive quality. But I did this then the following week in the Knapp Gardens in Barry, and as most of you know, half of them went missing within a night. But there we go. It's interesting how things are. But and then this was the first one, the next one that I did in Barry, actually over the Knapp. This did last a month or so, although I had to constantly keep rebuilding it. And it's based in this other journey, this inner journey again. I've always been fascinated by different traditions, and this one is inspired by the Tibetan tradition. I was introduced to that as a teenager. I think I was about 15, 16, interested in Tibetan Buddhism and other ways, other thought processes of how we understand the world. Patala was the home, or still spiritual home, of the Dalai Lama. Of course, he had to leave in 1959 with a little bit of a nudge from the Chinese. It wasn't so gentle. But what has consequently happened is the Dalai Lama has gone out and spread their wisdom and their understanding throughout the world, rooted in compassion, kindness, and understanding. So I thought let's offer a little bit of that to Barry in terms of just to see how people interacted with it. So there's 9 pillars there with the colours of the Patala Palace, placed in a landscape, again a Celtic landscape, where the 2 other main themes are, of course, the water and the stone. And there's a quote, be like the stone endures. And that was particularly pertinent in light to these community artworks, which often got kind of totally destroyed or dismissed within. Because over the years, since that time, I probably made about 75, and there's been all kinds of experiences have happened with them. But the stone endures, and that's important for your art and the way you create art. And it's a good probably metaphor and motto to carry us through our days anyway. But what happened with this one was I kept it going right through December until New Year's Day. And then I went down to the beach on New Year's Day, and like magic, the community had just built all their own little patalas, and there must have been 150 of these that that other people had built for New Year's Day. It was amazing. I thought, I can't believe that. That's what happened there. And of course, then that year the snow came, and they covered it, and it looked beautiful there. And there was some lovely photographs people took. So it kind of had that impact on that. But that was Patala. And these are some of the other collaborative artworks. As you can see, this is a friendship tree and festival. Most of the artwork start off, most of these festivals and events, if you like, they start off as an artwork. There's an intention behind it. This was in this case, it's a Celtic theme of the reverence for trees, the reverence for nature and what they stand for. So it's marking a sacred space via a tree. And then it's building on that, where you collaborate with the community, in this case, every year putting on a festival that kind of recharged the artwork. And it started off quite small with maybe 50 people. And then it did reach a peak a couple of years ago, and there was hundreds of people came, and they're from all different cultures. As you can see here, this is a group of Indian dancers. There's been all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds, and I've always pushed very hard for it to stay free as well in terms of an access point. So there was no restrictions for different members of the community. Everyone had an opportunity to go, and also there was a focus on it being in nature and part of nature. So it was the Celtic tradition that instigated this artwork, and then it was the Tibetan tradition which instigated this piece. This is called Kandroma, which in the Tibetan tradition stands for sky dancer. These were symbols of people, meditators that would go up into the mountains well above the level of the sky, well above the level of the clouds, so that they could enter into this kind of otherworldly place where there was no parameters of land or sky or anything like that, and they could just get lost deeply in their inner meditation. And this piece was made out of a piece of driftwood which was washed up on the nap at the Watchtower Bay and then etched into it. And there's elements of glass and mirrors were attached to it. And there was a little kind of etching panel which was run through it. And that again, that got torn down within the day. Again, up there, it was on that point. This man and his wife took real umbrage to it. They actually got quite angry, and thought, which was quite amusing after the time. But I tried to explain it to them that it was an artwork and it was engaging with the Tibetan tradition, and they weren't having any of that. Anyway, it kind of, what it did do, it led to this, which was a festival of peace around kites. Of course, the kite is something which is much more prevalent as a way of use in terms of contemplative practice in places like India. There's something really uplifting about just gazing up into the sky and looking at a kite, particularly if you've made it yourself. And then so I did this for every year for about 10 years. And then I think it was last year or whatever, the crowds just got bigger and bigger. And you can see there was hundreds of people turned out for that one. And the local schools had workshops that they created kites and things like that. So it's about, an artwork going out into the community and evolving and transforming. I can't move on, the time's moving. As is this interactive piece as well. This is a portrait of the community, where these artworks are made, and then there's interconnections between the pieces. So it started off with a few drawings of people in a local cafe, and then it was engaged with a question with a dialogue with that other person. Who inspired you in your life? Who motivated you? Who's been a big inspiration? They nominated somebody, then I went off and painted them. So it became an interactive, collaborative artwork that is constantly changing, because this piece is still going on. I've probably made 65 or so plus portraits now, and it kind of just shows the kind of interconnected links. And of this kind of way of working is about trying to define the space between the artworks again. In terms of this case, was about benevolence and compassion and why people did things, just because they love to do something, but how were they giving back and sharing to the community. And then your relationship, each of our relationships to that, and how that has an influence out into the world. So we might just make a drawing or sit down with someone, but we don't know, in the mysterious cosmic forces of life, if you like, how that's going to have an impact later on. So we connect with all these different kinds of people, and they're all making all different other kind of connections, and they're sharing all kinds of aspects out into their experiences. But this focus was on altruism and giving and sharing. And these are so these are just a couple of the portraits. This chap on the left is a chap called Darcus Howe. He was a civil rights leader in the 70s in Britain. He originally came from Jamaica, but he got caught up in a race riot. He was part of the Black Panther movement and pushed for, it was black rights, but it wasn't just black rights, it was universal rights. And he was the speaker of this rally in London. There was over 20,000 people there, and someone got killed, unfortunately. So he ended up standing in the Old Bailey. He trained as a lawyer, defending 11 black people in the Old Bailey for 6 weeks, and he won the case, which gives you some idea about the power and the strength of the person. But he also was the founder of one of the founders of the Notting Hill Carnival. So, the impact of the Notting Hill Carnival and all those other people expanding and sharing joy and happiness and interconnection has come via him and others. And this is what we sometimes don't realize when we're there in the presence of these other people or connecting with them. We don't know what kind of impact is going to happen. It's the space between. And when I was making his portrait, I went up to his house and sat with him. And he was an incredible chap, actually. He just sang to me with his beautiful, beautiful voice. He talked about his history and his heritage. And then when I finished the picture, he said, "Can I have a look?" I said, "Yeah." So he looked at it. He said, "Yeah, I really like that." And then he handed it to his wife, and she looked at it. And this was probably the best compliment I think I've ever had. She looked at it and said, "Oh, that's not a picture of Darkus. That is Darkus." And there was something about the connection that he was so honest and open in the process of making the art that was enabled to come out in the artwork. So it was about the process again. And then the chap on the right, Winford Ellis Owen, he set up something called the Living Room Project in Cardiff, but it's gone national now. And he was an alcoholic for many, many years, and he had to go through this suffering, if you like, but he came out the other end. And then he set up this project whereby the groups get together, the families get together with the sufferer, and they work through the situation for the person that's going through the alcoholic transformation into stop drinking and then going out into the community. And that's helped thousands of people again. And you think, well, again, it's about the interconnections. So there's an interconnection between Darkus, there's interconnection between Winford, and there's interconnections between all the other people that they've kind of connected with and helped. As is on the left-hand side here, Rowan Williams. Now, I went up to Cambridge to draw him, and we just sat in his house. At the time, he was the not the president, the person in charge, if you like, of Magdalen College, and they had a house park next to the college. And as soon as you walked into the college, there was a lovely feeling of kind of openness and generosity and mutual respect. And then went into his house, and there was a kind of, again, an openness. But I was thinking before I went up to him, what am I going to talk to this man about? At the time, he'd written about 80 or 90 books. He'd met all these world leaders. He'd just been the Archbishop of Canterbury for 10 years. I'm thinking, this is going to be interesting. Anyway, we sat for quite a few hours and we talked about all kinds of things. And he intensely looked at me deeply while I intensely looked at him, and we created this piece. And there's lots of other things I could tell you about that, but we haven't got the time today. As this lady on the right-hand side as well, Elora Finlay, another amazing contribution. She set up the Marie Curie Centre in Penarth. She's been a leader of palliative care in the UK and was one of the early members of the Trussell Trust that set up the food banks. And she's in the House of Lords now. But she lives in Llandaff, just opposite the cathedral. So that's where I went. I went to a house to make that artwork. And we've met on a number of occasions. But again, it's about the interactive quality of sharing time, deep present time with these people, and then making your artwork together and seeing what evolves. And again, as I said, think about connections. And to do that, you have to be courageous. You have to get into that unknown zone. And while you're there, it's important to be deeply present. And making an artwork encourages you and enables you to be deeply present, and then appreciate the uncertainty of that creation, because you don't know what it's going to turn out like. And you can imagine if you're making something with someone that you don't know what's going to turn out like, and it's a portrait of someone, you've got to be courageous just to give it a go, So I've, for the last 5 or so years, I've been engaged with this process of presence and marking the presence every day. So what you're seeing here is an artwork. Each one of these artworks is made each day. And there's now over 2,100 of them. That's how many days there's been since the 1st of January 2015. And you can see they're all compiled in these great big albums. And each one is joined with a few words or a sentence or two, which is interconnected with the artwork. Some of them have been made into these little folding books, but fundamentally, it's about the connection between the pieces and the presence as well. So these are just a couple of the artworks out of that 2,000 plus series. It's about being present every day, enjoying the process of making the artwork and having a dialogue, a conversation with it, and then let it talk to you. And sometimes I'll go to the artwork with a vague theme. Other times, as time has gone on, I try and go with nothing in mind and let the artwork have that conversation. And then together we come up maybe with the title, in this case, Divine Light Above the Clouds for this one, and the Evergreen Tree. And then it's fascinating because, your life's experiences, the physical ones in the material world, they tied in with the artworks that you're creating. So, an evergreen tree or something might then instigate going out and making a tree of peace and friendship in a park, but it started off as the artwork was the catalyst for the interactive process, which then goes out into the community. These are a few more. These are made in all different mediums as well. They're watercolor. You can see this one's charcoal and watercolor. Some are acrylics. Some are on different surfaces. They're all about postcard size, but some are, as I said, acrylic. Some are oil paint. Some are textured. Some are just paper. Some are collage. It's about being open to different things every day, not knowing, getting into that unknown zone and just finding out and finding what might appear and then seeing the interconnections with them. And then as time passes and the years go by, you start to see all kinds of interesting interconnections between the artworks. You might have a theme that appeared 2 years earlier, but to the day that you do it in 2 years' time. But you can only see that because you've made 4 or 5 years of these works. And you see rhythms or patterns through the year as well. There's certain artworks are made in March and they might look familiar to the artworks made the following year in March. So it just it's a way of understanding our presence and our relationship with the world more deeply. Obviously, if there was more time, I could tell you more about each of these artworks. So explore the relationship between the moments, the space, because it is at the heart of peace and freedom. It's at that space, it's that apprehended space between things where we do start to feel beyond our physical bodies, if you like, and you can feel a sense of liberation and going beyond time and literally free. These are a couple more. Interesting that they combine traditions again. One is a blending of, Christianity and Buddhism, and another one towards Buddhism. These look fairly similar, but they were painted or created months apart from each other. But you see different themes and different patterns coming through. I only noticed the other day that this kind of shape has appeared in this one as well. This is a symbol of a kind of jewel of understanding. Obviously, this is a Buddhist symbol of slowing down, be at peace. These are meditation beads and things like that. So it's taken iconic things from these different traditions, but then using a Western tradition, the icon is just the face from, Western icon painting to transform it. And then it's the interconnection between the symbols and these ideas. Again, there's a lot more we can talk about, but it just gives you an idea. And this other theme which comes through, you're searching for something, you're trying to deepen your presence, like as if there's this idea of a doorway or light, or you pass through one space to another, And I remember having a conversation with one of the people from Between the Lines, um, who went off for charity, got in a rowing boat and rowed across the Atlantic Ocean. As you do, you know. It took him, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, but he did it. He raised a lot of money for charity. We had a fascinating conversation. But one of the things which stuck by by me from his conversation I had with him was he said when he was in the middle of the ocean, sometimes the waves of 40 or 50 foot high kept going. But he said sometimes when it was calm, he'd be rowing away, and all of a sudden he would see something appear on his left or right hand side. One time he said he saw this old lady riding a bicycle on his left hand side through the sea. But then he said, you know, and then she would disappear, and then somebody else would run past on the right hand side. Obviously, he was having these strange delusions. But I said, well, what kept you going? He said, well, often after a strong period of rowing, I'd see this thing in front of me. I'd see this gate or this thing that I had to aim to go through. And he said, I would just row for this gate, and then I would go through it. And then he said, half an hour later, another one would appear, and then I'd row through that, which I found kind of fascinating. So these kinds of appearance, these kinds of things have just appeared in the artwork. Um, I don't know. I've probably made 50 or 60 doorways now as part of this Joy in the Presence. And these are like curtains either side, which are kind of need to be parted before we can get through the gate or get through the space to something rich and deep past that environment. So, you know, quickly moving on. The interaction of different pieces and creating that link between physically encouraging people to go out and interact with an artwork in physical space came through in this piece. So this was all about the trail. So people have an opportunity to go to a physical place to experience something. As it says, space is defined by its limitations. Art can move beyond that limitation and explore this dimension and share its jewels. And that's the important thing. It gives us an opportunity, you know, to think big. Art does. It can go beyond all boundaries, as we've touched on a little bit tonight. So we've got a series of places being marked here that have got a certain kind of significance for the community. First one is the St. Barrick's Chapel on Barry Island. As you can see, it's just the remnants now. It's just a few stones. And if you go there, it doesn't look much like that because there's a whole fence around it now. So I've taken away the fence, opened it all up. And you go and look in the direction of the old harbour there and out to Steepholm. Well, this is all part of St. Barrick's Chapel's story and, you know, what happened. And, you know, you can look into that later if you're interested. And then you've got this place at Llanmaes with this great stillness to it on this little plinth outside that used to be a cross that stood. John Wesley stood and preached, you know, but again, it's an important place in terms of it's marked by the community. These stood the test of time. This is Llantwit Church, but it was also probably one of the earliest universities in the country was there, St. Illtyd. And you get that when you're in the environment, when you go to these places. Often you don't have to go into the church itself, you just go in the grounds. It's about the sacred space that's been marked. As you can see here with this one, Kyra. This is a wonderful site that is just above Heel Trelai. And, you know, this prehistoric remains there. There's an Iron Age fort. It's just layers and layers of history and prehistory, and then this ruined modern-ish chapel is standing on that site, and that's got an incredible story to it as well. There's so much history. Again, I'm just so pushed for time. There's so much I'd like to share with you about that, but it's there. But you know, you can look into it a little bit more if you want to, and I've also got more information on websites, etc. Now, again, these are just wonderful places to go and visit and spend time. A number of them, like you saw in these are made in graphite, just 2B pencil, but some of them have also got powdered graphite, which is just rubbed in with the surface as well, just to create levels of softness. But St. Michael's and All Angels Church is just something else. It's absolutely beautiful in terms of it. The place that it's in is wonderful. There's no power to that building. You know, these are just gas lamps. It's very sacred. You feel as if you could be in a church in the Tuscan Hills or something like that. But there's just a rich resonance that comes from just entering that arena. And when you think, you know, thousands of people over the years have also imbued it with their feelings of resonance. And when you walk in, if you're sensitive, you pick up on these different aspects. Some of us also know about this beautiful place at St. Peter's. There's so much history to that place. Even the yew trees are over 1,000 years, they reckon. It's part of there. There's so much interest inside it and outside it. And I know some of us, we made some artworks ourselves there when we went there and painted it. Again, it's about the beauty and presence and space, as is this one with at Lavernock, but it's the interconnection between them. And for the artwork is the process of engaging up between the links. Not saying that the artwork itself is a fantastic artwork by any means, but it's about the process of moving between one space and another, and encouraging our community to move between one space and another, and the experience that they imbue and gain from moving from those ancient sacred places and sites, because all our history is noted in those sacred places. And I thought I'd just end with this small little watercolor. This is a watercolor made on a black hardboard, of the Knapp Gardens. As you know, a lot of people know I spend a lot of time down in that little area. It's nice to be rooted in a place, but there's something special about this place that I find special. I suppose it's because, yes, it's a park, and it was created at a difficult time, but it was created by the community in the 1920s. Of course, there was a lot of poverty and suffering, but they collectively came together. It came together with an interesting vision of making this social space that people could be and share and have uplift from. But they made it in a way that it was working with the natural environment. This used to just be a swamp, a natural swamp, and there's a swimming pool that used to exist just to the left of it there that was filled with the seawater. And just beyond this colonnade there is the sea, where we saw that Patala sculpture. So they've worked with nature, they've worked with the sea, they've worked with, the natural environment, and they celebrate in trees and Celtic qualities and ancient qualities, and it's all coalesced together in a space of, in a place of potential contemplation and uplift. So it's, again, it's just a marketplace that you can get richness and resources from. And I suppose this has been the theme right the way through this, from, going through early pictures and early artworks with psychological suffering, etc., transforming that to this idea of joy, peace, and freedom, because they are the lights of life, and they are those elements which make life just really worth living, and there's something obviously that we need to focus on as much as we possibly can. So, to suggestions for artwork, hopefully some of these things might have been of interest to you, and, you can gain some kind of inspiration from them. But let's look at some of the themes. So they're about exploring the relationship within our community. That's why I just think it's so wonderful what you've all done with regards to your art through lockdown. That's a good example of working with the community and your artwork instigating something and transforming people's lives. Consider how time and space is marked in your community. What things do you use to mark those times or special places? And how can they maybe be expanded, or how can they be focused on? And you can use your artwork to kind of do that. And how can your artworks in series explore the spaces between moments? What happens just before you create an artwork? What happens just after you create artwork? If you create an artwork on a Monday and then you don't create an artwork till Wednesday, what happened on Tuesday to make your artwork on Wednesday that much different from the one on Monday. That just gives you an example. So you get to explore the space between those two other markers. And then consider how you explore the moment and the freedom to be present. So, while you're making your artwork, how do you get more deeply present? How do you really explore the whole, as much of yourself as you possibly can and your relationship with your environment? And then consider how peace and joy can be explored and shared. So I said, these are the delights of life. These are the real jewels that we're all kind of working towards. They manifest happiness in us, and this is what we want to kind of create. And how can you share artwork to take your ideas to the community? As I said, with these little sculptures and as the artworks that you've done over this time, which is wonderful, and enjoy the process as much as you possibly can, because that comes through in your artwork. So that's just a guide. That's just an overview of 40 plus years of being creative and just trying to share something with you, really. So I hope it was of some benefit.
Thank you, Glyn. Thank you.
That was
really enjoyed that.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I used to actually run Barry Youth Centre, not when you were there, but when after John and Chris were there.
Yeah.
I was there for several years, so I did see your artwork there.
Oh, that's amazing.